3 a.m. Again, why did I ever think this was a good idea?
Hey there, Rise and Run family. Greg here with our second edition of Ask Us Anything, but host specific. And I'm really honored with all the questions that came in, so I'm going to try and answer as many of these as possible without boring you to death. But our first question comes from my buddy Tom over at the Will Run For podcast. And he asks me, what is the best race inside the Philadelphia city limits? And to me, it's a lesser known race. I mean, obviously the marathon and especially Broad Street are probably the two most popular. But my favorite is a race that usually happens the weekend before Labor Day, usually end of August, and that is the Philly 10K. It's one of the very few races that actually does not occur in the art museum area, you know, the area where Rocky made famous all those years ago running up the steps on JFK Boulevard. This race starts on South Street and you run through the streets of South Philly. You make it almost as close to the sports stadiums where you have the Eagles and the Phillies and the Flyers and the Sixers. What I really appreciate, at the 5K mark, you pass by the famous cheesesteak places of Pat's and Gino's, which are right across the street. So it's very, very tempting not to stop in the middle of the race in order to grab one of those. And then you finish back on South Street. They have an awesome after party. It's just a really, really cool and unique event. And I think it's my favorite race that happens inside the city of Philadelphia. And speaking of cheesesteaks, Michelle asks, do I like Pat's or do I like Gino's? The answer to that is technically neither, but if I had to pick one of those two, I would go with Pat's. When I was in college, I was a member of the music fraternity on campus, and after all of our initiations, as a celebration of our new brothers, we would take the subway down to South Philly, and most of the time we would be going to Pat's. Some of my fraternity brothers were a little crazy though and did what we would call the daily double, where they would buy one cheesesteak at Pat's and then go right across the street to Gino's and get one as well. But for my liking, that's a lot of beef and a lot of Cheez Whiz. All right, we're gonna stick with the food questions here. Diana asks, what is my favorite place for a celebratory meal after the full? And I gotta say, even though it has been a little hit or miss lately, usually my go-to is Ohana. I am a massive, massive fan of the Polynesian. That's where I own my DVC. And there's nothing better than running 26.2 miles and enjoying that with some nudes and some pot stickers and the wings and especially the shrimp. I can go without the beef and the chicken and everything like that. It's, you know, give me a whole skewer of shrimp and I'm a really, really happy camper. Not to mention the bread pudding is absolutely amazing. There's nothing better. Plus, you know, throw a lapu lapu on there and you have yourself a really good meal. If I had to offer some alternatives though, my two favorite sleeper hits in terms of celebratory meals right now. The first is over at the Caribbean Beach Resort, and that is Sebastian's Bistro. Really unique food. It's very delicious, extremely flavorful, and you actually kind of get the same pineapple bread pudding for dessert, which is really cool. And then the next one is in Hollywood Studios, and that is the new Roundup Rodeo Barbecue in Toy Story Land. Obviously, it's not Texas barbecue, it's not North Carolina barbecue or anything like that, but for a theme park, I think it's really, really good. The mac and cheese, I still have dreams about it. But yeah, top three, Ohana, Sebastian's Bistro, and Roundup Rodeo Barbecue. I guess we'll stick with the food questions here. This one comes from Laura. She says, as a former Lehigh Valleyan and Philadelphian, is it Italian ice or is it water ice? Now, if you're curious, the Lehigh Valley, that is an area that's almost equidistant between Philadelphia and New York City, an area in Pennsylvania where I grew up. Growing up, though, to answer your question, I think in my mind, and I'm sure my friends are going to hate me for this answer, and my wife's going to hate me for this answer, but it's Italian ice. That's what I grew up with. You go to the local Rita's and it says Italian ice. Now, here in the greater Philadelphia area, they call it water ice, or more appropriate, water ice, because they don't know how to say W-A-T-E-R. Everything is W-O-O-D-E-R, which is pretty funny. But trying to raise my daughter in terms of which one to teach her, we're going to let her use both interchangeably. But in my mind, it's Italian ice. I think this next question is super, super sweet, and it comes from Stevie. Stevie talks about the relationships that we build on and off course is what makes racing so special. And is there a person or people who helped me break out of my shell during the race and befriended me? And that is absolutely the honest to God truth. And there are two people that come to mind to answer this question properly. And the first is Bob. You know, if you go back to our origins video, it was Bob that I met at a random what was called a quarter of a marathon race in Ambler, Pennsylvania. He was up visiting his parents at the time, and I was wearing my wine and dine shirt that I was training for, and he's like, I'll see you there. And then that's when I got invited to the Facebook group that Alicia had started. So, you know, it was very, very special that not only did he talk to me prior to the race, but then he spent 45 minutes talking to me after I crossed the finish line, and he finished a heck of a lot sooner before I did. So, you know, not necessarily bringing me out of my shell, but definitely befriending me. I really do give Bob a lot of credit for that. And then the other person is another one of my, lovely podcast hosts, and that is Allie. I remember the first time I ran with Allie, it was actually with Bob as well, too. It was during the half marathon of Marathon Weekend in 2022. And we decided that we were going to walk as much of the half marathon as possible because I was doing Goofy, Bob was doing Dopey, and I believe Allie was doing Goofy as well, too. I had met Allie many, many years ago, but only virtually via Zoom, during those chats that we had started, just that, as COVID was first a thing and we just needed an outlet to talk about running. But it was during that half marathon that, over the course of 13.1 miles, you get to learn a lot about a person. And, Allie just asked me so many thought-provoking questions that really got me to open up, especially, when, the course does get difficult at times. And I shared a lot about myself. I got to learn a lot about Allie and her journey and her story, which is absolutely amazing to begin with. And it was at that race that it blossomed into such a beautiful friendship that we have today. So to answer the question, the two people that brought me out of my shell, Bob and Allie. Katie and Amanda asked very, very similar questions. I know on the recent podcast episode, I had shared that I was a big fan of Drum Corps International, and they want to know who are some of my favorite corps to watch. And to me, I have a few favorites. Probably one of my first that I've been following for a really long time are the Cavaliers. Back in the early 2000s, you could almost call them the New York Yankees of drum corps because they would just win year after year after year. They had some really incredible shows. They did a whole show based around Billy Joel music, who is one of my favorite artists. Another year, they did a James Bond show that they won a championship with. And to this day, the Cavaliers do have the record for the highest score ever scored in a DCI competition, and that is their 2002 show Framework. So I really like that one. Some other ones that I really enjoy too. I am a huge, huge fan of Carolina Crown. They might not win every single year or or crack the top 5, but they are so musically sound. It is like an absolute wall of sound when you go to see them perform live. It is truly, truly amazing. One of my favorite shows that they ever did, Triple Crown, all about horse racing. Visually, it was done so well, and they got such high brass scores, for that show. That was really fun to watch. And then probably my third favorite corps is the Bluecoats. They actually just won the championship the other weekend. They do some really, really unique shows as well too. One of my favorites that they've done in recent memory is a whole show based around the Beatles. And again, huge Beatles fan as well too. But what I really appreciate about the Bluecoats is that when you cheer for them, you actually, don't do your typical cheering. You actually yell blue. And the first time I ever went to a DCI competition, I thought they were booing at them, which was crazy. But then you learn that they're actually bluing at them. So that's unique. And then the second question that they had for me is, what instrument did I march? So as much as of a DCI nerd that I'm actually never got a chance to march DCI. I was a woodwind guy. I was a saxophone player in marching band, and I marched saxophone when I was in 8th grade all the way up through college. So as part of the high school, we were a really, really small high school. So we had to dip into the middle school sometimes. So that's why I started high school marching band in 8th grade, did 4 years at my local high school, did competitions there. And then when I moved on to college at Temple University in Philadelphia, I did march 4 years with the pride of the Cherry and White. Got another question here from my buddy Tom over at the Will Run For podcast. And he asks me, if I had to up and move my family more than 500 miles away from where I am in suburban Philadelphia, where would I move to? And to me, I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking, oh, I'd move to Orlando or move closer to Disney. And that's actually not the case. I would actually prefer to always have a Disney destination be somewhere where I need to get on an airplane or something like that. I don't know, that just to help keep that magic alive, I guess. But to answer your question, Tom, there's actually 2 cities that I have in mind that I would love to move to. And I'm shocked I'm picking these places because I'm not a huge fan of hot weather, but these are definitely hot weather cities. The first is Austin, Texas. I have been there on a long weekend with my wife many years ago, and I've been there many times for work, and I love the vibe of the city. The motto of Austin is keep Austin weird, and I love how they embrace that. A awesome food truck scene, barbecue all over the place. Some of the best barbecue I've ever had in my life has come from Austin, Texas. But lots of art and culture. You have the University of Texas there. So it also, even though it's a city and it's a state capital, it's also kind of got a little bit of that college town vibe feel to it. So Austin's really cool on my list. And then the second would be New Orleans, Louisiana. I have had the opportunity to go to NOLA many times for work. And as someone who loves jazz music, I just really, really vibe with that city. Not to mention the food scene is amazing as well too. You can't go wrong with beignets and po' boys and jambalaya and gumbo and barbecue shrimp. It's all awesome. The citizens of New Orleans are just absolutely wonderful. And not to mention Mardi Gras seems like a really, really good time. So Tom, it would be Austin, Texas and New Orleans, Louisiana. And speaking of Will Run For, I have a question here from Denise, and she asks, did I know the Will Run For crew before I knew Rise and Run? And that is actually not the case, but I do have a funny story about the first time meeting that crew. So this was Marathon Weekend 2022, and I was boarding the plane to come back to Philadelphia, and there was a woman wearing her half marathon finisher shirt, and I thought it looked like Aaron from Will Run For, but I had never officially introduced myself or interacted or anything like that. So I'm standing at baggage claim at Philadelphia International because historically you always wait forever and a day for your bags in Philly. And I saw her and Michael standing off to the side, and I very awkwardly went up to them and I was like, "Hi, do you happen to be part of the Will Run For podcast?" And we had a good laugh out of that, and that started a wonderful relationship with Michael and Aaron. I've had the opportunity to run with both of them. Michael has been a pacer for me this past year at Broad Street. We were on the same relay team together at Loopy Looper. So he's just become a really good friend. I love hanging out with Aaron. And then finally, I did have the opportunity down the line then to meet Tom and Diana, and they're just incredibly fun to hang out with, whether it's at expos or in the wave pool at Typhoon Lagoon. They are just such a wonderful group of people. And even though they love to razz me on almost every single episode of the Will Run For podcast, it is a relationship that I'm so glad to have. And I truly call them great friends. All right, Jimmy, this one's for you. Changed my shirt for this question. Jimmy asks, who is my favorite Muppet? And that's got this guy right here, Fozzie Bear. I have loved him ever since I was a kid. I remember I actually have a golden book of that I had as a kid called like Fozzie's Joke Book or something like that. And I just thought it was the coolest thing, and I would tell my friends and family all these jokes. And I think it was probably the start of my iteration of dad jokes as well too at a young age. But absolutely love my boy Fozzie Bear. Next question comes from Jennifer. She asks, what is my favorite race and my favorite medal, and what is my dream race? I would say my favorite race that I have ever run, and this is when I earned this guy right here, and that is the 2002 Walt Disney World Marathon. It was my first ever marathon. It was a race that I had trained for over 2 years, because I was originally signed up for just the marathon in 2021, but obviously we all know what happened there, and that race weekend got canceled. So it was a race 2 years training for, and I was just so overcome with emotions, and I was so glad, because Disney World means so much to me, that I got to do my first marathon in Disney itself. So this one will always have such a special place in my heart. Most unique medal though, or my favorite medal, I will say, is this guy. I have earned 3 of these. This is the medal that you get after running the Bird in Hand half marathon. It is an actual horseshoe. So if you drop this on your toe or it falls off your medal rack, it's gonna make a thud. And I love how they weld on the back plate to every single medal. Very excited when I run this race in a couple of weeks. I will, as I said on the podcast the other week, I'll be earning my first horse because I'll have 4 horseshoes. It's such a unique race, and it's so picturesque. So if you're, as I always like to say on the podcast, if you're looking for that Run Disney adjacent race, the Bird in Hand half marathon is really cool. In terms of my dream races, I have 2. From a world major perspective, the race that I would love to run is the Tokyo Marathon. When I was in high school, I was an exchange student in Japan for the summer, and I have absolutely fallen in love with the country. And I've go back for work one time. I am, even after 20 plus years now, I'm still in contact with my host family. We chat all the time. My host sister herself has also gotten into running as well too. She just ran her first marathon a couple of months ago and got a sub 5, and I'm so proud of her. And she has told me all the time that she wants to run a race with me. So I hope one of these days I get to run the Tokyo Marathon with her. Stateside though, probably the race that I have on the top of my bucket list would be Big Sur. Even though I know it is extremely, extremely hilly, I just, you see the photos of what you get to experience over the course of that race, and it looks extremely picturesque, and I would love the opportunity to do Big Sur. Tara asks, what is the most difficult situation I've had to overcome, whether it be during a training run or a race, and how did I overcome it? For me, the biggest obstacle I've ever had to deal with is when I did a catered training run in preparation for doing my first ever Dopey Challenge in 2023. In December of 2022, I ran the Rehoboth Beach Marathon. I love Rehoboth Beach. It is the beach that my family and I go to almost every year for a quick little summer vacation here or there. So I thought this would be a great place because I love the area and it's a nice course and it'll be cool in December. Well, the forecast was terrible. It rained on me from mile 3, and this is no joke. The rain stopped when I hit mile marker 26. I have never been so wet and I've never been so cold in my life. And I honestly had no idea, even by the time I hit like mile 10, how I was going to finish this race. And the way that I was able to get through it is that eventually, I think it was just before the half marathon mark, I started leapfrogging because I was doing run, walk, run intervals. And I was leapfrogging with this woman. But then I realized that she was also doing intervals as well too. And she's like, "Do you just want to sync up and do this together?" And I was like, absolutely. Her name was Sarah, and we just got to know each other over the course of the next like 3.5 to 4 hours as we were just getting dumped on. And we were just able to share a lot about our personal lives and our running journeys. Found out that she actually knows Chris Twiggs and she knows the Galloway method. She actually used to be the Galloway training group head in the Pittsburgh area. So it was absolutely wonderful to get to know and run with Sarah. And if it wasn't for her, I probably would have never finished that race. Next question comes from my buddy Gretchen up in Connecticut, and she asked, because I tease her about this all the time on the podcast, what is my favorite thing to buy at Costco? Now, if it's going to be the actual store itself, probably one of my favorite things to get are the Costco version of the Kirkland's knockoffs of those Just Bare breaded chicken nuggets. You know, they always say it's the Chick-fil-A dupe or whatever. But so I really, really enjoy those. But when it comes to the cafe, which, you know, you always have to hit up before you leave, my favorite thing to get there is the berry ice cream sundae. Hot take here, I think the hot dogs and the pizza are a little bit better over at Sam's Club than at Costco. So hence why I'm going with the ice cream sandwich. But you can't go wrong with a $1.50 hot dog and soda combo there. Marla asks, what have I learned the most since becoming a podcast host? And for me, that is maybe not necessarily learn, but maybe reaffirm how kind people are. I have been very fortunate to meet so many of you that are part of this amazing, amazing community. And just the kindness and the generosity that you have shown, whether it is to myself, to my fellow podcast hosts, to my wife, to even my daughter. I am truly thankful and blessed to know each and every one of you. And I'm just so glad and so happy that there can be so much positive energy and positive reinforcement still in this world today. And the fact that we pass that on to others really does make my heart melt. And so like I said, not necessarily learning anything, but just reaffirming that there is good and then there is kindness in the world and is getting spread around, especially here in the Rise and Run podcast community. Next up, we have a question from Kayla, and she asked something very, very simple. Power Line or Power Line Max? And Kayla, I'm gonna let the shirt say it all. Next question comes from our friend and perfect marathoner, Alan Young, and he wants to know, how do I handle the negative comments of running? And I gotta say, this is something that I have learned through our community, as well as the guests that we have had on this podcast, is that it doesn't matter what you look like, how tall you are, how short you are, how skinny or how large you are a runner. And sure, you know, comments might get made on a course about, you know, having to move over to the side because you're being too slow and getting in somebody's way. But the fact is, as long as you remain focused on your goal and what is important to you. It doesn't matter what others say about you. You are a runner regardless of pace, because we're all running the same course, we're crossing the same finish line, and we're getting the same medal, and the time doesn't matter. Forward is always a pace, and always remember that, and know that no matter what body you are in, you should love your body and continue to tell yourself that you are a runner. Debbie wants to know if I have gotten my daughter into running and how do I train with a little one. Well, let me tell you, my daughter has done one Run Disney race with me, and that was the 2022 Wine and Dine 5K. That was the one that was themed after Coco, and Coco is one of our absolute favorite movies in this house. So we had to do that one. And I'm not gonna lie, training was stressful. At the time, she was a little over 5 years old. And, even though I thought, okay, well, we'll do run, walk, run intervals, but we'll do it very, very conservative. Sure, it might have worked for like the first 5 minutes, but then after that, it was just something that she was losing interest in, and trying to get her to properly get to where she needed to be created a lot of stress on my end, a lot of phone calls to Bob so she could talk to Bob and Miss Becky to help cheer her up and everything like that. But eventually we did get to the race. We did one run, walk, run interval, and then we just walked the entire time and then crossed the finish line running hand in hand. So while stressful, it was a very nice experience. But my daughter has expressed interest in wanting to run the 5K at Springtime Surprise. So hopefully, cross our fingers that we get in for that race. And she told me that she will take the training much more seriously. But I'm not gonna lie, I still do have some PTSD from that time that I had to wake her up at 2:30 in the morning for that 5K. And she was not a happy camper. She was fighting me. I'm pretty sure I got smacked in the face, and trying to calm her down that early in the morning was not fun. But when you see the joy on her face crossing the finish line, it really does make up for it. My Pennsylvania buddy, Allie, without an E, asks, did the gang have to twist my arm to be part of the podcast, or was I excited right at the jump? And Allie, I gotta tell you, it's the second half of that. I was extremely, extremely excited to be part of this, because it is something that I have always wanted to do. I just wasn't sure what the right medium was for it. And then when Bob pitched this idea of a podcast, I knew that I was in hook, line, sinker. Not to mention, I was excited because it gave me something to edit outside of my everyday job, where I do video editing and audio editing. But at least the topic here is a lot more fun than what I edit on an everyday basis for work in terms of the medical field. But I will say, the thing where you got to twist my arm a little bit, and I'm getting there, and it's really thanks to Jack for starting this YouTube channel, is because I have a career in production and post-production. I am always a guy who is behind the camera or behind the mic. I sometimes can get very, very uncomfortable doing this right now, talking to you into a camera in front of the lens. Hence why I picked a career that was behind the lens or behind the microphone. So the gang had to twist my arm a little bit for me to be able to get in and do things like this, but I'm slowly getting more comfortable with it. So hopefully I'm not coming across too awkward on this video for you all today. And the last question comes from our buddy Doug, and he asks, if I could remain in my current age, but go back to any decade of a Disney park, which decade would I pick? And Doug, for me, this is a very, very, very easy answer. And that is, I would go back to the 90s. And the reason for that is the 90s is when I started going to Walt Disney World as a kid. And the reason why I would want to do that is so that I could relive some of those childhood and family memories that I had on those trips, or to be able to experience various attractions. Like, to me, one of my absolute favorite things that was a must-do for me every single year as a kid was going to the animation tour at Hollywood Studios, or back in the day, MGM. I absolutely love that tour, and it starred Walter Cronkite and Robin Williams, and it was really fascinating to see the animation process from storyboards all the way to the final production. It's what got me into art, thanks to also my father being an art teacher as well too. So to be able to have that bond with him in that attraction was just really so wonderful. Speaking of MGM, you still had the backlot tour, which was a ton of fun. And then, just all the other like little random things that you would see, in the parks. Like at one point, the Ninja Turtles were in Hollywood Studios, which I was a huge Ninja Turtles nut as a kid. And then, obviously this was more for my sister, but there used to be the Barbie show in Epcot. Being able to go back to relive some of those memories, also see some of my favorite shows. As you all know on the podcast, my absolute favorite fireworks show of all time is Illuminations. And the fact that that was part of the Millennium Celebration at Epcot right before the turn of the century. Again, I just have so many memories of Walt Disney World in the 90s. So that's where I would go back to. Well, friends, that's going to do it for this edition of Ask Me Anything individual podcast host edition. I had a ton of fun answering your questions. Thank you so much for submitting them all. And we look forward to our next edition in this series. Happy running, everybody.